Sanmona.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this space where we operate from to honor one of South Africa's giants. Whether you call him a political giant or you call him an academic giant, he fits all of them and more. That is Mzala Nxumalo, or Jabulani Nobleman Nxumalo. Thank you very much for coming here to join us. We look forward to a very fruitful day where we'll be engaging one another, exchanging ideas, and then, of course, getting to know Mzala more than we did before we came here. And looking at the program, I can assure you that people who will be presenting have done their homework. They promised me that they are going to give you the best that they can. So we look forward to a very fruitful day, and I'll just use this opportunity to welcome you all, and then say that whenever an opportunity arises, we would expect everyone to participate. The aim here is not for one or two people to do the talking, but the aim is for all of us to participate and therefore have an engagement, which is what Mzala was known for, engaging people and then trying to get their side of the story on whatever issue that was on the table. So then we look forward to a very fruitful day, and then I may also take this opportunity to thank the events organizers, that is Jessica leading the team today, and then Derek, the gentleman you just saw here. So these are the people who have made this day possible. Of course, working together with the rest of the team, two of whom are here, Dr. Carlson, who is sitting on my far left, and then our trusted commander here, Mr. Pesi Ngonyama. And then for those of you who might not know, we have John Pompalis, who is our board chair. You might have met him informally, but then I'm introducing him formally to you now. He's our board chair. So we basically count on him for guidance to make sure that the center is functional and then it also achieves what it is meant to achieve. So without further ado, then I'll hand over to the program directors so that we can start soon. I'm told that our colleagues from Zululand are already in town. They are just finding their way here. So then they'll be joining us shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nxumalo. Well, good morning, everybody. From me, Jenny. My name's Jenny, and I'm quite happy for you to use that name. I've been helping with the establishment of the Mzala Nxumalo Center since the middle of last year. What we'll do is we are going to have two presentations this morning. The first will be by Pesi Ngonyama, who's here with me, and then we'll have discussion. And Percy, when the others arrive, let's just have a pause and let them take their seats, and then we can proceed. So we might just interrupt you a little bit. So the way in which we've thought of this is to have a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll have some discussion. The discussion will be perhaps about half an hour, depending on how we use our time, because we have started a bit late. So if you aren't able to see Percy very well, just move the chair. We've got enough space. Percy is working with the Mzala Nxumalo Center at the moment, and he is writing the critical biography about Mzala, or of Mzala. And so we are privileged today to have him start to share some of the research that he's begun. Over to you, Percy.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Good morning, Sambonani. And welcome. Right. Just straight to the point. Basically, what I'm trying to do in this paper is that this year marks the 25th anniversary of Mzala's death. So, over the years, there's been a number of activities and initiatives that other people who knew him mainly, and mainly people who are part of the organizations that he was part of, have sort of like initiated some activities to remember him. And these activities have taken a number of different shapes. And so what I'm trying to do in this paper then is that, so what all these activities amount to, an act of remembering, and creating memories of Mzala, and making sure that his legacy lives in for future generations. So in this paper, which is a very first draft of this much bigger project, which is the critical biography, looking at this whole concept of memory in the public context and its other derivatives, how it happens at a personal level, at the social level, and collectively. The public context, meaning that which is embedded within our national consciousness and within our grand narrative. I'm using that context to apply it in relation to the way those who knew Mzala
we said we would pause there, don't worry.
Yeah, okay, we're going to proceed. Let me just repeat what I was saying before I had to pause. I'm trying to apply this concept, which you find in many disciplines, of public memory, to look at some of the ways in which people who knew Mzala and those who are just inspired by his work have remembered him. Now, remembering and thinking about someone take forms in a number of different ways. I try to look at that, I look at the memorial lectures and the statements, the public lectures and the political implications and the objectives behind, those ways of memorizing Mzala. In a way, the text from all these documents, the statements to be either on his day of death or on his birthday, they constitute very rich archival material for future research purposes on the life of Mzala. So I've applied this concept in these different ways which Mzala has been remembered. He's remembered but not only by those people who knew him and his comrades. He's also remembered by people who never knew him, who never met him, and who are not necessarily part of the governing ruling ANC alliance, but who have found inspiration in his work. And I'm certain that with more work being done by the center, the way people think about him and more of the creations of Mzala will be reshaped and take other forms within the changing political and socio-economic context of the country. People talk about Mzala and its relevance within the contemporary context. With the context changing, the way people also talk about Mzala also seems to be changing, taking different directions. It happens with Mandela's way, his legacy is contested. You find people like who are part of the ANC, not part of the ANC, but they still regard him as their heroes. So that, to the extent that people claim, whatever others are doing is a betrayal, and this person and others. Mzala himself will welcome that, given his way of and his attitude towards different, this would have welcomed that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but just to show that the reading of Mzala 25 years after he passed on is not homogeneous. And the way people have remembered him, they've also used the opportunity as a commentary on current political developments. I'm just going to look at a few of these, these things that have been said about Mzala, how Mzala has been remembered. Now people have recalled some of the events that Mzala was part of. And I want to start with an obituary which was released just a day after Mzala passed away by Brian Banti. Brian Banti knew Mzala very well and he worked very closely with him. And I want to lump that up with another tribute by Asop Pahad. I'm not going to define, I'm not going to tell you what Asop Pahad is, I'm sure you know. So all these comrades had worked with Mzala. So in the tribute by Pahad and the obituary by Banting, what becomes clear, although the biographical aspects are almost similar, but what becomes clear is that the memories of Mzala that they have, they mention all these other things, but they are specific on the fact that ultimately he was a communist. They were also communists. So it's a way of remembering a fellow communist by fellow communists. They are specific on that. When they talk about his writings, they make it clear that in his analysis, the class content was always there. Right? And I think to some extent that is what the Minister of Education has also argued in a number of events that have been held recently to remember Mzala that part of the reason why we should bring Mzala back is that we need his class analysis within the current context. Right. And on the third anniversary of his death, there's a tribute by Eddie Maloka. Eddie Maloka also knew Mzala. They were during his stay, especially in Swaziland. And it's published in the African Communist. Now, the African Communist is where many of Mzala's articles were published. And this one by Eddie Maloka differs from the one by Pahat and the obituary by Panti in the sense that it sort of like gives you, sort of like provides one with more details on the personal side of Mzala, the family side, and all those sort of things. And there is background to some of the things that people know about Mzala, but they don't know the background. For example, he tells us that the book which Mzala is mostly known for, Kacha Buthelezi, there was actually debate within the ANC, and there was reluctance in having it published by the movement. Right? The paper sort of like, they have to dig deeper into that background. So all that information is critical and competing, a more critical, general critical thought of Mzala. And of course, then there's Minister Nxumalo who's spoken and delivered addresses on a number of events to remember Mzala. At a recent one held in Cape Town, he opens in his address by seeing the establishment of this center as a revolutionary moment in our history. And he goes on talking about Mzala and the legacy that he leaves as an academic and an activist and a guerrilla for causes. And within the current context of the national movement on Fuse Must Fall, he also uses the address to sort of like comment on that as well. And he sort of like decries the fact that within this Fuse Must Fall movement, the class content is not necessarily clearly uses Mzala and Mzala's world outlook to do that.
Okay. Discussion short.
Right now, I would like to go back to the colloquium which was organized in 2013 to remember Mzala, where the idea of a biography and what was then thought to be a foundation received serious discussion. And again, a number of people talked about Mzala's daily life and schooling and everything. And in a way, the biographical aspects, and I suspect it's because the available texts in the moment is derived from from similar sources. But most of them have used the Eddie Maloka tribute in the African Communist to talk about Mzala. And it's sort of like in a trajectory, teleological way. He's born in Dundee, early schooling, Louwsburg and Butterworth, and exile. And there's a lot of emphasis or overemphasis of the exile years, which only amounts to 15 years of his life on earth. But at the colloquium, there were like personal anecdotes by people who knew him from where he was born, growing up, before exile, and some of his activism before he left for exile. So, and there were messages of support and appreciation by the family, which were read out by his daughter. So, although the whole colloquium was from a very academic perspective, and it was mainly scholars in the panel. So it was sort of like good to have these personal anecdotes of Mzala. Right. So far, I've spoken about what I would group together as non-official public memorizing. Mzala has also been remembered at an official level. And this happened in 2010 when he was awarded the Order of Lutuli in silver by the president. Again, there was a statement sort of like introducing Mzala to people who didn't know who he was and why he's being awarded this. So that's an official way of creating memories of Mzala. And interestingly, the order itself, it's named after Chief Albert Lutuli, which is also another form of creating memories of Albert Lutuli and preserving his legacy. Now, at an official level, unlike at a social level or personal level, there are some implications, especially when public space is to be used and public resources. Just an example. You just think about the process leading up to the renaming of Johannesburg Airport to Oliver Tambo. Yeah. It's not the same as a branch in East London organizing a memorial. But these are ways of preserving somebody's legacy. Take different forms. Public memory forms part of our grand narrative and our national consciousness, and it's part of the post-apartheid government's process of rewriting our history, to tell new stories and to create new narratives. But again, within these narratives, there will often be alternative narratives. The same applies to Mzala. I'm almost finished. But I did mention that it's not only people who are part of the alliance that have thought of Mzala as relevant. Now, we all know the background leading up to NUMSA's expulsion from COSATU. But from the records that I've looked at, in recent years, NUMSA have made it a point that each and every year on the day Mzala passed away, they will do something to remember. Either issue a statement or some small commemorative event. So they also see him as their hero. And even after they were expelled from the party, from the alliance, they still consider Mzala as their hero. And in some of the statements, they've used Mzala to critique what they've termed a neoliberal agenda. So they apply Mzala's memory within that context. So you see, from 1991 now, 1991, Maloba speaks about Mzala's relevance within the context of political violence and Ngata's involvement in Buthelezi. It's time-changing the way people remember a person. But also memory on an individual basis, there's a number of factors that influence or triggers it. And people remember same events, not in the same way. It depends on a whole lot of factors, their capacity to remember, all those things. And I think I'll stop the introduction there. And sort of like allow for discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Percy. Thank you. Yes. If you haven't got the abstract of Percy's paper, we do have copies here on the table if anyone would like it. So let me open it to the floor as to if anybody's got a question they want to ask Percy about. Derek. Derek, and then, so we'll have two questions from Derek and Mr. Deck.
In your brief discussion, who owns Mzala?
We're going to take two.
Yes. So who owns Mzala?
That's. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, my name is Mzala Nxumalo. My question to you would be from your reading of all the events and the people who have spoken about Mzala. What values do they actually attribute to Mzala? Because I think it will make more meaning, to take the values that we attributed to Mzala in order to apply them in our current society.
And then we'll have another round of questions.
I think your question is to an extent relates to and people. Look, my argument has always been, and I think this talks directly to what I called official public memorialize. The struggle by its nature was a collective effort. But at a mainstream level, those who are honored, sort of like elitist, and all that. The people that have remembered Mzala have looked at particular aspects of his life, right? For example, the lecturer Jeremy Cronin looked at the theme was revolutionary intellectualism. And because the people who organized the event think of Mzala in a particular way. And others who have remembered him for different reasons. So within the struggle of those collective, there are those people who are exceptional, whose activities and role is worth remembering, preserving for future generations. There's a good of talk about Mzala, they remember him, different aspects of his life, which they use in the contemporary context to stimulate debate and to advance a number of points of argument. The values that you talk about, I think the values are within, the values become clear within what people have said about him. But the reason why I remember is because people think there's value in his memory and there's reasons why it should be preserved for future generations. I'm not sure if I've answered the question satisfactorily, but if not, we'll come back to some of the issues that you might have. Just in short, I don't think Mzala belongs to anyone. He's embedded within our collective memory. It's up to us to engage with his writings and make him relevant within the present context in whatever way we deem necessary.
Let's have two questions, yourself and at the back.
You just gave us like sort of methodology to say how you're going to go about it and all these things. But I was going to say what makes him unique. I would just trying to exalt another communist brother. Then what does it have to do with us now, as you say,
And the question?
Oh yes, I think it's a brief, unfair, but important question. In the period from 2012 to now, how would Mzala read the fast political developments, i.e. the birth of EFF, the division between the Federation of Workers, the blackmailing of DAs, all claiming to preserve what one would call liberation or revolution? How will the memory of Mzala, of his work, sit with these developments?
What makes him unique? I think, there are many things that make him unique. He was an exceptional scholar, and he was a committed activist. I mean, it's like probably not to the same level as Mandela or Tata, but he's somebody that has left history within the history of the liberation movement. So, and if you read this, okay, you get to know more about what made him unique. So I'm not going to go to it, but it's definitely somebody that a lot of people think that he should be honored, remembered for his role in the struggle. And he's somebody that a lot of people think his ideas are still relevant today. There are many other people who were part of the struggle during Mzala's time, and nobody talks about them. Because they never left anything to engage with. Mzala is one of those people that, and I think every nation, there is particularly those that have gone through struggle. There were those from Cape to Cairo, Haiti. There were those national heroes that, that they talk about for years and years. I don't know what Mzala would say, and then I don't think anybody knows for sure what Mzala would say about the current political situation. And many of those who know him will tell you that he will definitely be commenting, not be quiet, about social injustice, about corruption. He will definitely not be quiet because that was his nature. He was never shy to challenge leadership. At a lecture on Wednesday, somebody was talking about Mzala. He was never shy to challenge leadership, but he was not rude towards leaders. He raised issues, but he was never brought in the way of reasons. So those are all the things that people are speculating that he would have said. Nobody knows for sure what he would have said about the entire socio-economic agenda post-1990. Nobody knows for sure. But you can speculate based on the rich archive, because all the things that he wrote, the rich archive to work on, studying his life and his times. Right. Nobody knows for sure how to argue that, but you can speculate that this was his nature. This is probably what he would have said. But definitely, those who know him, they say he would have said something about corruption, about a number of things.
So perhaps what I didn't say at the outset of starting this your presentation was that this week is the week where we are commemorating the 25th anniversary of Mzala's death. And on Monday we had a press conference at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban because of its centrality, geographically speaking. And on Wednesday we had a public lecture at the university. And here we also had a reading and writing circle, which is just what we're starting, and then we have this seminar. So we've been trying to have some events that are around this. And next year we will probably have another memorial lecture. And what strikes me in reflecting on these questions in your paper is that at this outset, because we're a new organization, there's a lot of, I've been to a few events now, and I'm not somebody who knew Mzala, but there have been a few events where, and the publication, the booklet that we've brought out, where we are reiterating this, there's a similarity in the refrain about Mzala. And I think that it's important at the outset that people just kind of hear again, and a new generation hears again about who Mzala is and learns the kind of just general history and the anecdotes. And we're hoping that we will move into a much more critical research which takes perspectives that he might have used in his writing, as you say, and applies them to the contemporary era, as you were asking about. So it's to be expected that there's a bit of repetition in like the public lecture that we had, where it's again telling us about the life. All right, I'm going to go for another round of questions. So Becky, and I'm going to go to people who haven't asked Derek, and red shirt on the bed.
No, thanks, Chair. Mine is a very quick one. There are people who have argued that those who look at Julius Malema, they say the reason why he's behaving in the manner he's doing is because he is trying hard to imitate the person we know for kill the poor, kill the farmer. That is Peter Mugabe. Now, within the context of today's presentation, there's been an argument that if you look at Mzala and then you look at Chris Hani, there are some similarities. I just want to know what is your take on that argument. In other words, comparing Mzala and Chris Hani and then finding some commonalities between the two.
Okay, thank you for that. And your question?
Okay, thank you. I think I'll start with a comment and then make a question from that comment so you guys can see where the question is coming from.
Not too long.
I think I'll start with a comment and
Yes.
then make a question from that comment so that you can see where my question is coming from. Looking at the societies before the independence for most of our countries in Africa, I can say nearly all of the liberation heroes were kind of in a certain society where they were all heroes and they were all kind of working together for the common goal. Now, what we see is after independence, we see a lot of change. We see that the very same people who were really heroes are starting to kind of lose the confidence of these very same people who they were working with very closely and in the public. So, my question is now, if we can take people like Nyerere, Mugabe, and all those other heroes who were very celebrated before and then as they enter into the post-colonial and get caught up in the global capitalist world and everything, they kind of found it very hard to maintain a balance of where they belong to. So now my question is, if we are looking at the biography of Mzala as a person, and as you said a critical biography of him. Now I'm saying, how critical is it? Are we saying that in the post-colonial, we're saying he's a very person who knew and not afraid of challenging any economic injustice, social whatever it is. So now, how are we going to say if he's getting into post-colonial era, was he going to be a very same person, or was he going to be also caught in the very same way that most of the leaders will get caught up in? Because we can't just say we're predicting that he was dead before he got in the post-colonial, so he's probably, if he was here, he would be not scared to challenge whatever is happening, as my brother pointed out, from 2012 to 2019, the corruption and everything. We can't just draw with that, with what he did before the post-colonial, because most of them who entered the post-colonial actually get caught up in the road.
Thank you.
Chris Hani, Mzala. Look, I think if there are any similarities between the two, it's a matter of coincidence. Coincidence, not predetermined. Mzala and Chris Hani were part of the same house, but they're from different generations. And I'm not sure, at the moment, from what I've looked at, if they ever interacted. The chances are there. But if there are any similarities between the two of them, I would think they are coincidental, not something that is predetermined. Like the Morocco, some people use Morocco in 1969, Mugabe 1985. How Anichad, but the circumstances are really different. Chris had been in jail, was arrested, and then he came into with a number of other people. They had serious issues to raise in the leadership. In Mzala in 1985, when in different contexts. There are similarities. And I think Mzala has other similarities. Some people even say there are similarities between him and late Zimande. Again, those are, for me, coincidental, not to say, because so and so it's like this, then we must have become this and that. There are similarities, then they are coincidental, then they predetermined. I'm not sure if yeah, I mean there are post-colonial studies that have tried to look at the situation in Africa. What happens during colonialism and, when independence has been achieved. Again, I'm not sure, I won't say for sure what Mzala would have said to our own post-apartheid situation. And again, bearing in mind that apartheid ends here at the same time that the Cold War ends. That has got its own implications. And then you have the democratic government coming into power when neoliberalism is the game in town, and unfortunately they also adopt those policies. I'm not sure what Mzala would have said to that for sure. But again, as I said earlier on, he would have been very upset by the situation of the majority, who were many of the victims of apartheid. This is 2014. So much, and he would have said something about corruption. That's what people who know him say, right? But post-colonial studies have tried to look at the situation in Africa, what really happens. I think there's a number of factors that are responsible for the change in attitude of leaders once independence. Some people talk of what they called not the end of colonialism, but a neo-colonial era, neoliberal era. So I don't know what Mzala said about those for sure. But there are studies that have sought to explain the situation in post-colonial Africa. Some of them country by country to say this is what happened here, this is what collapses. Right, we can adopt the position that says, oh, all of them, they sell out and they sold out. True, but under what circumstances? Country by country, what happened in Zambia, what happened in Zimbabwe, what happened in Mozambique? In Angola, MPLA, what will drop? You can look at it. Because the conditions are not the same country by country, they're different. Okay.
And then John. I think this will be the last round of just these open questions, and then I want to pick up on something that
Well, my name is Tigere Murenga, and my question is, okay, given these all debates of transformation that are taking place in our learning institutions, to what extent do you think the study and the creation of centers like this will maybe improve or advance the study of African literature in maybe South Africa?
That's a good question. Okay, John?
Okay, to answer the question, I wanted to contribute to discussion. Okay. I think anybody who writes and leaves a legacy in writing will be interpreted by many people in many ways. And it's not just actually with writing, it's even in political activism. I mean, if you listen to the debates in Parliament these days, and even outside of Parliament, you could think that the closest people to Mandela were the DA, because they're always praising him, saying, oh, you've left Mandela's values behind and all this sort of stuff, But in the DA include many people who were in the National Party in those days, who were quite happy to keep Mandela in prison. And so we can't always go by what people say later. People interpret somebody for their own purposes. Mzala too will be interpreted the same way. And the important thing is to read his writings carefully, look at his life, and make our own interpretations, and possibly argue for certain interpretations. I can't say I want to do that now, but with Mzala, a central issue with most of his writing, and his talking, by the way, because I've heard him many times, was the issue of the national question, and the interrelationship between nation and class. and between the class struggle and the national struggle. And you saw them very much intertwined, separate, but not unrelated. In fact, very closely related. I would say that, I mean, somebody raised the question, how would Mzala have reacted to the situation today, in particular issue of the student issues? Well, I think as Percy has pointed out, you just don't know. You don't know how people would have developed. You can see many people today who have developed in ways which you would never have guessed in 1991. So we don't really know that. But my guess would have been that Mzala would have welcomed the student challenge to authority if he had been anything like he was at that time. And that he wouldn't have been quiet, as somebody said here. He was likely to have engaged very much in the debates, but he's also not likely to have accepted student positions uncritically. The one issue I think he would have taken up was the relationship between student struggles and class. And there has been some relationship now through the issue of the outsourcing issue. But theoretically, one doesn't see how class and nation fit together there. Kind of ideologically. And I'm sure he would have, I mean, my guess is that he would have engaged on that question and tried to deepen the discussion. And he wouldn't be quiet, and he wouldn't be just criticizing the students or just supporting them, but he would have engaged in a discussion. But a discussion which starts from a position of sympathy. And then the last thing I wanted to comment on is the similarities between Mzala and Chris Hani. I think there were similarities, and they arise from the fact that they were both parts of the same movement. They were both members of the ANC, they were both members of the SACP, and you can't evaluate the life and work of either of them without looking at their life within those organizations and within the struggle at the time, the way it was then. They were different though, because although they did know each other, I can confirm that, they knew each other quite well. Chris Hani was, we remember mainly as a soldier and a political leader. And Mzala also was a political leader, but his main area in which he's going to be remembered, I think, is his writings, his theory, his understanding. If Chris was a theoretician, he was a theoretician of the struggle, of how you can conduct an armed struggle. Mzala also looked at that issue in some of his writings, in particular the issue of, well, he had a big discussion, which was quite widely discussed within the ANC, on the issue of what's the purpose of the exile wing, and what's the relationship between the exile wing and the internal wing of the ANC. And he wrote all that stuff about keeping the rights inside the pot and so on. And the other thing in which I think that they were similar to them was they were both critical of the movements in which they were, but also fiercely loyal. So they were both loyal and critical. And I think that is the characteristic of both of them. Thanks.
Okay, so I see some comments on the response or into the other question. And then we'll try to wrap up.
I think Jones was
A comment, yes.
There was a question about how important is Mzala, whether the soul debating transformation in higher education. That is
In the African literature.
African literature, right? Okay. Interestingly, I mean, some people have thought of Mzala and his relevance within that context, that, even suggesting that his book on Buthelezi should be perhaps be used as a prescribed text, because it's a very rich work of history of the KZN. It's not just about Buthelezi. Some people see its relevance in that context. There's whole debate about introducing African literature scholarship. Some see Mzala as important within that hold to it. So yeah, the other people will see his legacy in that way. I think that's
I think I'd just like to add that definitely the establishment of these kinds of centres will make a huge contribution to examining African literature and rediscovering some of the things that maybe have been overlooked or have been forgotten or have never been discovered. Like, a reader who hasn't ever really engaged with the books that Percy is referring to, The Chief with the Double Agenda. So, you know, for these kinds of readers and exposing them to these authors, we're wanting to have the reading and writing circles here where we can get in depth into some of their literature. And that's why in a seminar like this, in a way we're engaging with the presenter, and in the reading and writing circles we'll be able to engage with the actual writings of scholars like Mzala. What I'd like to do just in closing, and then we're going to hand over to you, Becky, just in closing this particular section, part of this morning's session, is to reflect on how did Percy present his paper. How did he present his argument to you? And it's important for us as students and as scholars to step back a little bit from the presentation and to reflect on that. And I think as the next speaker comes, we will be doing the same sort of thing. And if I can just comment, because we've run out of time, instead of having a discussion around these things, that Percy presented us first with a definition that he's opened up this question of how do you remember and what is memory and how is it a fixed construction or is it fluid and shifting. And then he presented us with some evidence, or he referred to evidence. He referred to various scholars who've actually produced some written work around at the death of Mzala and subsequent to it. And he categorized that as the non-official public memorizing. And then he referred to a different type of memorizing, which was the official. So, and then he kind of went back to the definition, rounding his circle of his argument, going back to it and looking at, so what is the significance of remembering? And so this is how he has developed and presented his argument today. Thank you so much, Percy. We really are going to have other opportunities, other seminars, other conferences where we can hear more from Percy and how he's carrying on and progressing with the project he's involved in. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, you are welcome to stay. I want to just introduce you first. So I'd like to just before we start with the actual presentation, I want to introduce you to Dr. Becky Mngomezulu. Becky has been working with me, and I've been working with him for the last couple of months, so we've been getting to know each other quite well. And he is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of this Mzala Nxumalo Center. And has been a scholar of international affairs and public policy, and is going to be speaking to us today about some research that he's conducted. And I'm very excited to hear about your research. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you the 15 minutes, and then we'll have some engagement. And so hopefully it was about 45 to 50 minutes that I gave to Percy in total. So we'll try and do the same with to you. Is that all right? That's fine. Okay. Thank you so much, Becky. Over to you.
Okay, now, thank you very much, colleagues. There is one similarity between what Percy just did and what I'm going to do now, in that a part of our discussion is looking at South African politics, liberation struggle politics, so to speak. And then the only difference is that with Percy, he was focusing on Mzala, and then what I will do, I will look at Mzala in a wider context, in the wider political setting. In other words, you now understand who Mzala was, so that when I mention him and infuse him in my discussion of liberation struggle politics, then we'll understand the person I'm referring to. So Percy has done my job very well. Okay, so basically then there are a couple of issues that I would like to go through in the few minutes that I've been given. And this is where this is how I'll be structuring my talk. But maybe as a preface, I conducted oral interviews in my rural village. Ngwavuma is where I was born and bred. Ngwavuma made me the person I am. So if I'm a bad person, blame it on Ngwavuma. If I'm a good person, blame it on Ngwavuma. So then I went back there in 2014 and 2015. I conducted oral interviews looking at liberation struggle histories in that particular part of South Africa. And I was interviewing former MK soldiers who operated in that area. Some of you might have seen 1 or 2 years back where the provincial leadership and later on President Zuma and a couple of other people from the national office went to Ngwavuma to look at the caves that were used to hide the material. So when they talk about the material, they are referring to the guns that were coming into the country. Brought by those who were coming from outside. So I interviewed people then who were responsible for taking care of those caves and then of course pushing ANC missions in that part of South Africa. But I start off by reflecting on the ANC as an organization, because the people I'm talking about here and the person that Percy talked about here were either members of the ANC or the SACP or both. So we're talking about the same group of people here. So then the ANC therefore cannot be left out of the equation. So we know for a fact that the ANC is the oldest organization on the African continent, not just in South Africa. So if people tell you something else, then you must tell them that this is what the center says and this is what sources tell us. So the ANC is the oldest organization in Africa in general. And then of course it is equally true that over the years the ANC has undergone a metamorphosis. So it has changed from one mode of operation to the other as the situation demanded at each particular moment. Here I've just listed 6 of them. In the first instance, I say the ANC changed from what was called ANC, African Native National Congress, to the one we know now as the ANC, that is African National Congress. And there were quite a number of reasons then why they did that. Secondly, the ANC became better organized. At least most sources agree that it became better organized in the 1940s when they were now understanding what they were up to. Then they said, let us do things this way. Of course, we can debate that. And of course, the other change is that the ANC waged different wars against the apartheid state till 1960. Up to that point, the ANC was waging a different war in the sense that it was trying to reason with the state. It was negotiating with the state. But then, of course, later on, it became open to the ANC that this reasoning exercise was not working. Then in 1960, then the ANC moved to the liberation struggle, that is in this case to military activity. And that is how the MK or Mkhonto Wesizwe was then established. And then of course, it decided to move the struggle from the urban centers to the rural areas for a number of reasons, which you can talk about during our discussion. And then of course, as you all know, even people who were not born when the ANC was formed, some of us were around. So even people who were not born in 1912 when the ANC was formed, but at least we all know the 1990s, that from 1990-91, then negotiations started. It is the same ANC that is now negotiating. The same ANC which is in the 1960s was in fact waging a military war against the apartheid regime. So then the point I'm making is that the ANC is not a rigid organization, but it has changed over time as situations demanded. So then the paper therefore uses Ingwavuma and Swaziland and Mzala to try and unpack some of these developments. I start off then by just quickly running through the profile of Ingwavuma for those who don't know my village, and I'll be angry with them. Geographically, Ingwavuma falls under Umkhanyawood district municipality, and then of course Ijozini local municipality. There are now two municipalities. There is Ijozini local municipality, and there is now Gwamhlabeyalingana local municipality. In the past, there used to be one. Then they separated for a number of reasons. And then, of course, it shares the border with both Swaziland and Mozambique. And the point that Derek likes the most is the third bullet, which says Ingwavuma town is only 3 kilometers away from the border with Swaziland. So in my village, if you want to go to Swaziland, we have two options. One is to go via Lavumesa, that is Kolela border post, in which case you need your passport, but you don't need a visa. Then the second option is to do it the easy way. You just walk across, and then you're in Swaziland. So then the reason why then Ingwavuma got involved in the liberation struggle was mainly because of point number 3, its proximity to Swaziland, and then of course to Mozambique. So it was easier for the liberation fighters to come in and out of the country undetected by the apartheid operatives. It has 4 polities. I don't like the word tribes, and then you can ask me why later on. So it has 4 polities, and these are made up of 3 that border Swaziland and then 1 that borders Mozambique mainly. The 3 on the border with Swaziland is Gwanyawo, Gwamngomezulu, and Gwamatenjwa. And then the one who shares the border with Mozambique and the Indian Ocean is the Tembe, they call now Tembe Tribal Authority. So that is where the Ingwavuma is. And then of course, there are conflicting reasons as to why, as to how the name came about. I found 3 as to how Ingwavuma came about. One is that there was once a leader called Vuma, and then the place of Vuma was then called Gwavuma. And then later on, then it changed to Ingwavuma. That is one version. The second version says the place was named after the river, Ingwavuma. Ingwavuma River is still there today. But then the locals sometimes call it Ingwavuma to distinguish it from the town Ingwavuma. But that is local politics, we don't want to get involved. Then the third one is that it is named after a local tree which is used by traditional healers, which is called Ingwavuma. If you go to Emakete, down there in Durban, you will find it. Ask for Ingwavuma, you will find it. So that is, these are some of the sources. Then, of course, there are people who are of the view that Ingwavuma was discovered, underline that, by someone called Charles Saunders, who was a magistrate at a show. My argument is that there is no way that Ingwavuma could have been discovered by Saunders, because it was already there long before he came. But then that is what the sources will tell you. All right, then Ingwavuma, of course, was affected by the South African War, which other sources refer to as the Anglo-Boer War, the second Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. And then the first one was 1881, so I'm not interested in that one. Then it was destroyed, and then, of course, it was re-established much later. So this is just a map to show you where my beautiful village is located, so that at least at the back of your mind you know the area I'm talking about. There is Ingwavuma, the red dot. So after this seminar, I'll be driving to that place, which will take me 5 hours from Durban. So that is where I should be later today. So that is why I'm running fast, because there is this long journey waiting for me. Now, Ingwavuma's role in MK activities. I'll quickly run through this because I don't want Jenny to be angry with me when I eat up on her time. Given its geographical proximity with both Swaziland and Mozambique, it was a foregone conclusion that Ingwavuma was going to be involved in the liberation struggle. Because then, the moment the ANC or the MK was formed in 1961, there was a need for our liberation fighters to escape the country and then sneak in, operate some missions, and then sneak out. So then Ingwavuma became an ideal place for that. But interestingly, Ingwavuma was first infiltrated by the PAC before the ANC. There is someone who was called Mr. Zulu. I'm still struggling to find out his real name because there are conflicting messages as to what his first name was. But they all agree that he was a Mr. Zulu who came from Soweto. And then he is the guy then who came to my area. And then there was Inkosi Ntunja of the Mngomezulu polity. And then Inkosi Ntunja welcomed him to listen to what he had to say. And then he introduced the PAC. And then after which Inkosi Ntunja was convinced, and then he started the recruiting for the PAC. So a number of people were recruited. To be exact, 25 of them were recruited, and then eventually they went into exile. But then during my interviews, I found out that some of those who left the country as PAC members came back having converted to ANC. And then I asked them, but guys, why did you change? They said, no, the ANC became the most popular organization, and therefore, for us to have political sustainability, we realized that we were better off within the ANC than in the PAC. So then they came back as PAC members. Even after the ANC was unbanned, liberation movements were unbanned, they came back as ANC members. So I just mentioned some of their names. There are quite a number of them, but I just mentioned a few here. And then the ANC came in, and then recruited also in the area. There are a number of people then that were recruited by the ANC in the area. I identified a few here for some reasons. The first one, Jimson. Jimson is known as Ngoloi, that is his Zulu name. Jimson Ngoloi Mgomezu. So in today's terms, people will call him Skok. He was a Skok of the movement. So this gentleman used to work in the mines in Johannesburg. And then he was recruited by the ANC when he was already in his 60s. And then because of his dedication to the ANC, then he was taken to Swaziland to run a particular unit there. So he operated from Swaziland even though he was from here. And he didn't need a passport, by the way. He just walked down the mountain, then he was there at the base, and then he was in charge. And then the other one, Nokuhamba. Nokuhamba Nyawo, some of you might have seen this in the news in 2012 when President Zuma went to a funeral at Ngwavuma. It was the funeral of Nokuhamba Nyawo. Nokuhamba Nyawo was a sister to Ngoloi. Nyawo, in fact, was the surname where she got married. Otherwise, she's a sister to Jimson Ngoloi Mgomezu. And both of them were honored by the president. And if you see the actual paper, you'll see one got the Order of Lutuli, and then the other one got something else. But basically, these are some of the key and early recruits in that area. And then these ones, Ngwekwe, his name is also Jabulan for some reason. And then his nickname is JP. He's still there. And then if you interview him, he doesn't want to let you go because he says these things with a passion. And then the other one is Ben Mngomezulu, who controlled a certain section of the caves. And then Mandla. Mandla is very important in this discussion because at one point there was a spy in the area who was telling on these MK activities to the special branch operating at Ndomo and Jozini. And then Mandla said, no man, we can't let this guy go. For some reason they shared the same name. They were both the Mngomezulus. One was fighting on the liberation side and the other one was a spy. And then Mandla said, no, I'll pay him a visit. So he hunted him down, he found him and he killed him without JP knowing about it. And then JP had, hey, somebody's been killed, and then discovered Mandla has done it. Hey Mandla, what have you done now? Because the special branch will be on our case now. Indeed, that's what happened. And then they ran to Swaziland. Eventually, then of course Mandla was apprehended, and then he was tried, and they sentenced him to death, plus 8 years extra. Fortunately for him, the ANC heard about his case because he appealed. And then he was taken to CMX, maximum prison in Pretoria. While there, then he befriended Robert McBride. And they are still good friends to this day. McBride visits my area to see this gentleman. And then there are a number of interesting stories about him. When we have time, remind me, I'll tell you about him. But he's one of the most interesting characters. Of course, Ngoloi too, because he was killed by the special branch, which apprehended him in Swaziland, took him to Piet Retief, which is now called Mkondo, and then to Jozini. They interrogated him. He didn't divulge any information about the MK operatives, and then they killed him. They took his body to Sodwana Bay, and they blew it with a missile. As a result, then, he was given one of the orders by the president in recognition of his dedication to the struggle. And then these cadres then of course operated in both South Africa and Swaziland. As I said, they operated the caves. Then the last bit of my talk is on the 1982 land deal, and that is, we are coming closer to Mzala. the 1982 land deal, for those of you who don't know, this was a deal between the South African government and the Kingdom of Swaziland under Sobhuza II. And in terms of this deal, what was going to happen is that King Sobhuza from Swaziland was going to make sure that the ANC doesn't operate in Swaziland at all. So all the ANC cadres in Swaziland were going to be kicked out of Swaziland, and in return, King Sobhuza was going to get Ingwavuma together with Gangwane, which was under Mabuza. Then, of course, it became a long struggle. There are tons and tons of newspaper cuttings about this at the archives here in PMP, copies of which I have somewhere. All right, of course, and then the man who was instrumental in this deal was Korenov. I remember when I grew up in my era, all these old grannies used to say, hey, we hate this Korenov. They called him Korenov. It was Pete Korenov, who was the Minister of Cooperation and Development. So he's the one who was responsible for making sure the deal became a reality. And then, of course, different sources were cited about Ingwavuma. Some were saying, historically, people around Ingwavuma are not Zulus, but they are Swazis. And then others were saying, no. These people have always been Zulus. So they went to the archives at the Cape Depot archives, and then they looked at maps that were drawn in 1890. They said these maps show that Ingwavuma falls under Zululand. Others said, no. These people always paid allegiance to Swaziland. So there was always contestation. And then people like Buthelezi fought to the bitter end to make sure that Ingwavuma doesn't go to Swaziland. And in fact, I'm planning to schedule an interview with him because I want to know from him, why did he invest so many resources in defending Ingwavuma? I know some of the reasons, but I want to hear from him what he has to say. And then, of course, when this deal did not go through, of course, Sobhuza was not happy, Korenov and his cabinet was not happy, but then the reality is it destabilized MK activities in Swaziland because the special branch was now guarding Ubombo Mountain to make sure that if you are crossing over to Swaziland, you will be interrogated. If you are coming back, you will be interrogated. So there was some disruption there. And then, of course, the locals, as well as Nkosi Buthelezi, as I say, were instrumental in that. I'm told that people collected R2 each to raise funds to protect Ingwavuma. And then on one weekend, it came to 4,000. At the time, it was still a lot of money. Today, you can buy 2 items and it's gone. But they raised 4,000. And then on the other side, teachers, 3,000 of them came together. They also made their own donations to make sure that Ingwavuma doesn't go to Swaziland. At some point, I'm told, people were told that if you go to Swaziland, you are going to lose old age pension. And that is the same strategy that was used in 1994 by Inkatha. Now Inkatha, not Inkatha Nkululeko Yesizwe. Inkatha is a political party saying, if you vote for the ANC, then bid your old age pension farewell. And then afterwards, people realized, no, this is a blatant lie. And they said, no, we'll get pension whether we vote for the ANC or any other party. And things have changed. Okay, then of course, King Mswati tried also when he took over, and then this didn't fall through. So basically, the land deal didn't work out. Now, this is the point I'm interested in. Mzala was deployed in Swaziland in 1983, just after the attempt to take Ingwavuma to Swaziland, right? And then, of course, the debate was still fresh in people's minds. So then he had to come into the picture at that time. He posed as a newspaper reporter. In Swaziland, we have the Swaziland Observer, we have the Swazi Times, and then we have the Siswati version of it called Tikatsi Temaswati. That is the Times of Swaziland. So those are the 3 prominent newspapers. So in this case then, there comes Jabulani Dlamini. Used Dlamini because Dlamini is a popular surname in Swaziland, so as to disguise, and it worked well for him for some time. And those who attended the public lecture will have picked this up, that he used to ride a motorbike for which he paid only 5 rand for petrol, and he used to have a pipe which he never lit and all of that. So this is what he used to do. So it took time for the Swazi police to notice this guy is dangerous, and then eventually they knew, okay, this is not what he's doing. There is something else he's doing. Then they got hold of him, and then they deported him to Mozambique. But because of his determination and because the movement had realized that Mzala was a good asset, they then sent him back. So he found his way back into Swaziland from Mozambique, and then this time posing as Jabulani Mkhatshwa. And he operated in a different area now, which is, if you know the geography of Swaziland, you know that the area where he operated from is now closer to the border, so that he could sneak into South Africa and then out without being dictated. And then during these operations, the place is called Shiselweni. So then during these operations, then he made sure that he established an MK unit at Ngwavuma, in what was called then in Natal Rural Machinery. This is the machinery that formed the foundation of Operation Mvula, which was established in 1986 under the command of Oliver Tambo and George Slovo. And then inside the country, Mek Maharaj was the man in charge. And then, of course, assisted by the Sheikh brothers, Yunus and Mo Sheikh. So these are the guys who were responsible for making sure Operation Mvula. In fact, it was Operation Vulindlela, opened the way. That is what they were saying. But they shortened it as Mvula. And Mzala frequented Ngwavuma, therefore, and then set up this unit. So that was his contribution to that area. And if you ask people around here, there are a few people who still remember him, but those who do know that there was someone called Mzala, and he came to this area, and this is what he did for the movement. And then Swazi authorities became aware of his operations, and then eventually, in 1984, they apprehended him, and then they deported him to Tanzania. Okay, then in conclusion, Comrade Chair, the ANC has been around for over 100 years, which is the point I mentioned earlier. And then during this time, it has undergone a number of changes. And the ANC strategies have been adaptive as the situation demanded. The decision to take the struggle, for example, from the urban centers to the rural areas is an epitome of this adaptive mind of the ANC, of reading the situation and responding appropriately. And Ngwavuma is only used in this paper as an example, but was not the only rural area to make the ANC strategy work. Ngwavuma and Swaziland are cited to trace Mzala's political activism in South Africa. So I'm under no circumstances claiming that Ngwavuma is the only rural area that made the ANC's new strategy work. There were other areas, those on the border with Lesotho, those on the border with Botswana also played a significant role, but I'm just using Ngwavuma here as an example. And then in a nutshell, both Mzala and Ngwavuma cannot be written off when writing the historiography of the liberation movement in South Africa. Anyone who does that will have done a disservice to the movement. Thank you very much.
Percy, take note. Please join me here. So we'll thank you so much for that. It was really interesting to hear, and speaking also from your personal passion for this that political story and historical account. Okay, let's keep to our pattern of 2 questions in each round, and we're not going to eat too much into lunchtime because as Dr. Ngomezulu said, he's going to be needing to go on hit the top to get home for personal emergencies. Okay, there's one there. The second question. Thank you.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. In fact, I must comment that the presentation was very, very insightful. My question goes like, how would you relate to the life of Mzala as a lesson for leaders today in contemporary times? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As much we are celebrating the life of Mzala today, I would simply would like Mr. Ngomezulu to please briefly give the discussion on exactly what was the ideology of Mzala as an individual?
If it's possible.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you for these two very important questions. The lessons for today, I think I deliberately cited or used, when I was asking a question to Pesi, I deliberately mentioned Julius Malema and Peter Mokawa, and then of course said Mzala and Chrisan. For some reason, yesterday I was at another event where a couple of questions were asked at DOT. They were launching what they call Africology, an institute for Africology. So they asked me to go and present them. A similar question was asked, and my response, the response I would give today is the same response I gave them. I said that what you do is not as important as how you do it. So if you look at the leaders I'm referring to, if you look at Peter Mokawa was a militant guy and he could cause havoc. But the difference with Peter Mokawa, when the ANC called him after he had made these utterances, he would listen. And then I'm not sure if we could say the same with Julius Malema, for instance. I'm not being political, I'm just spelling things as they are. So in other words, if you look at Mzala, Mzala was one of those people who criticized the ANC from within, but then he did it with dignity and respect. So in other words, as much as Mzala would want people to be open-minded, would want people to be critical, he wouldn't want people to be disrespectful. So in other words, to the young and upcoming leaders today, they would learn a lot from Mzala by standing on what you believe in, but then of course, convincing the next person with dignity and respect, and then avoid being disrespectful. Because if you disrespect that person, in a way, you are disrespecting yourself. So this is what I can say is a lesson to the young upcoming leaders. And not to accept things at face value. You question things, but then you question those things within certain boundaries. And then if your organization sits down with you and gives you your other side of the story, you are a good listener. That is what he was. He was an orator, but he was also a good listener. So that is why we are saying these things about him today, because he did both. In terms of ideology, Mzala is the kind of person, if you look at what Percy referred to, and then what John also referred to, Mzala is known for a number of things, two of which are his notion of the national question, and then two, his seminal work on Kajabutelezi, chief with the double agenda. So most people, even people don't know Mzala, but then they happen to know this too. That basically tells you that he's the kind of a person who wanted to look at issues from a broader perspective. He wasn't narrow-minded. For example, if you look at this book, Kajabutelezi, chief with the double agenda, most people say his intention, his primary intention was to criticize Buthelezi. That is just part of the discussion. One of the things that Mzala was doing in that book was to criticize the Bantustan system, or the homeland system. But then he used Buthelezi at the time as an entry point, because one, he comes from Goje, in present day KwaZulu-Natal. Inkosi Buthelezi was operating from KwaZulu-Natal. Inkatha was operating from KwaZulu-Natal. So he had to use the situation he understood. But then another explanation is that there were talks in the UK, there were talks in America that South Africa is almost ready for a blackface. But that blackface should have these characteristic features. And by so doing, they were basically creating a space for Inkosi Buthelezi. And some people were convinced, in fact, that Buthelezi was the right person to lead this country. Until Mzala said, no, man, there is something wrong here. Let me try and block this guy before he gets so popular. So it's a bit of all of this. So in terms of ideology, I would say Mzala is the kind of a person who was against what I would refer to as political parochialism. So where you just become rigid and say, this cloth is black and nothing else, it can't change. So he was, if somebody comes and says, this is red, you wouldn't dismiss that person entirely. You would say, okay, on which grounds are you saying that? And then we debate issues. I remember having a discussion with Minister Zimande at one point. He said there was a day when they spent the whole night debating one sentence. The whole night, I even missed his train and then I couldn't go home. So that is the kind. So he was a critical thinker who wanted society to be understood in this broader perspective.
Okay, John, let's see who else would like to ask a question. And in the front, thank you.
Okay, I'd just like to ask about the nature of the struggle in Gwavuma. You spoke about it before Mkhonto we entered the area and after as well. What are some of the activities which took place there? I mean, were they mobilizing people, mass meetings, attacks on police, whatever it was,
Thank you.
Actually, my question is linked to that. As an operative, I'm curious to know what Mzala's tasks were. What was he actually engaged in doing in terms of, was it mostly strategic sort of networking, or was he engaged in actual sort of guerrilla tactics in the struggle?
Okay, thank you very much for these two questions. Let me do them in reverse order. Mzala's task. Mzala, as indicated earlier, he operated from Swaziland. But then, as I titled my paper, it's based on the ANC's decision to move the struggle from the urban centers to the rural areas. And then if you look at some of the speeches made by President Zuma in 2009, including, of course, his address to MK soldiers at Ngwavuma, in an event that was held there in December, he reflects on this. He says the ANC took a decision as an organization nationally that the struggle that we are waging against the apartheid regime in the urban centers has so many complications. And then there were quite a number of them, which I'm not going to delve much into. Then they said, how can we then redirect the struggle to arrive at the same goal, but then wasting lesser resources than we do, and without attracting the attention of the special branch and then all others who were working for the apartheid government. Then they came to the conclusion that, okay, let us move the struggle to the rural areas. And Mzala is already in Swaziland, right? And then, of course, which is a point that you link up with John. So the ANC opted for, in fact not opted for, was forced to move towards the military struggle, to wage a military struggle in the 1960s, forming the MK in 1961. Before then, they were trying to reason with the state. At that time, that is when they started identifying these rural areas that were strategic to enable the ANC to operate without attracting the attention of the state. So in other words, in this case, I'm trying to answer this question simultaneously. So in other words, before 1960, you don't hear much of political activity and MK activity because there is no MK to talk of at Ngwavuma or anywhere else for that matter. But from 1961, when the MK is already there, and then the ANC is trying to wage a one-on-one war with the apartheid government, but then it's difficult. Then it is experiencing these problems. Then it says, okay, let us wage this war, but from a different direction. Then it moves to the rural areas. That's when Ngwavuma then comes into the picture. Because even this Jimson, Ngolwe I referred to, was only recruited after MK had been formed. Because they're saying that we now have to operate both from within the country and outside the country, and then these rural areas will enable us to do that. Now, how they did it, they said, okay, Ngwavuma is strategically located. So when we leave the country, we are going to use that because we can do so without using our passport. And then when we want to leave through Mozambique, we'll do the same. Then, of course, in Swaziland, they ended up having some people who were making sure within the security officers who were working with the MK. These are the ones who would pretend to be arresting them and then take them to the camp and then make sure they identify the safest route and then let them go. And then they'll say, no, these guys have disappeared. They'll dispatch soldiers towards South African border. Meanwhile, they'll be going to Mozambique, going to Tanzania, then to Angola, some to Libya, and so on and so forth. So basically then, these activities, MK activities, start after MK has been established in 1961. Before then, we don't hear much. And then Mzala, therefore, was tasked to establish a unit, an MK unit at Ngwavuma, so that these are the people who will be trusted with the material. When the material comes in to infiltrate the country and be used in some operations, then he would make sure that he talks to these people who are taking care of the caves. And the people who are taking care of the caves were from local, so that they knew the terrain very well. And then if it's not safe here, then they'll find other ways. So that's how they came in. So his main mission basically was to establish the unit and then make sure that he advises those who are operating. This is the next move, this is the next move. And he was not operating alone. There were other people who came from as far as Johannesburg. They would infiltrate Ingwavuma through Swaziland and then go back there. There is one Mr. Meyer whose name keeps coming up in every now and then, who was originally from Joburg. Others were from Devon, and they were from all over. But then they didn't want to go straight because they would be intercepted. So they would sneak into Swaziland and then come to Ingwavuma, pass the word around, go back down there, and then they would do that. Even when they were giving money to these people who were mining the caves, they would take the money from wherever they got it, and then they would go to Swaziland at night, go to the caves, leave it at strategic places. And then these guys were mining the caves, they had their own signs how to do it. And if you wanted to go into the caves where they were, and then you didn't do the sign that they knew, they would eliminate you. So for you to be there, then you have to know the trick, and then we'll survive.
We're going to have two last questions, or rather, well, we'll include a third one, and then this is the final round, and then I'll wrap up. Thank you. Okay, let's start with you.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm David Itze. I work here at Peter Marisburg, but also a student at UKZB. What would you comment on the role, what would be your comments on the role of media in carrying this legacy? I know that from 2010 to now, I'm sorry, I keep on periodizing my comments, you know, the likes of JB, Marx, Moses Godane, as you say, Mzala now, a couple others have been respected, you know, honored, you know, trying to keep this legacy. For some reason also they have been very influential in SACP, founders of certain aspects of the party. What is the role of media from where you stand in making sure that this is not just a legacy that is available to a selected few, or those who can afford to sit in seminars like this, you know, whether by media is very open, social networks and radio, what, instead of only using it on the events where there are award ceremonies or whatever, but to keep the momentum. I'm asking this in the context where I know Mshongo, the story writer and the player writer in Devon, wrote a piece on Johnny McCarthy, and it was, you know, at Playhouse for some time. For people who didn't know Johnny McCarthy, got to know even MK operatives, his role internationally, so all those kinds of tools and media orientation towards this. What will be your comment? Is it doing enough, or what more can they do?
I think we got the question now. Yes.
Oh, I'm Stephen P. I work and study at UKZB. It's very interesting that there are three questions that have been asked, which are almost the same. I asked about what is his unique contribution,
Yes.
and the gentleman asked about what is the ideology. It's almost the same thing. And the gentleman with the red one says something that is very interesting. You referred to Mugabe's failure of. Yes. So when you come to such a workshop and you hear this word, you are trying to find a way in which there is a particular type of a change that comes. Everything that we've heard so far, it's called green narrative. What we've been saying so far is about how to exalt this, their contribution within ANC, even their loyalty. Okay. My paper that I'm writing on is actually about going out of order. It means I don't want to be loyal anymore. Not like Julius is such, but to some extent almost like Zina. So the question that I ask is to say, what makes Mzala unique? Uniqueness means, apart from his contribution, is recognition, which is of course, that's why they say that here. What other effects that might possibly break this order that we have now, because we have tried to use the same order of the heroes, but all the maybe if Mzala was in Communist Party now, like Blade, we're still criticizing them because things are not working, people are still poor. What is it that this center will contribute that will give another perspective of change that is unique and more effective than what we have so far?
I think we've got that. Yes.
Thank you. My question is more on the issue of preservation of oral literature. It comes up from your presentation that there seems to be a lot of oral histories around the community of Iwavu with regards to the operations of liberation movements. I would like to know what processes are there to preserve such information from that community? Or are you yourself have preserved some of the interviews that you conducted within the community?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me do like I did last time, doing them in person. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The preservation of oral histories is very critical. There was a time when we used to talk about writing history from below. These are the kinds of histories we were writing. Instead of following the grand narrative and then looking at Hitler, who is a hero, and Napoleon Bonaparte was a hero, and then suddenly King Charles is a bloodthirsty savage. So we're saying let's go back and find out from people who are closer to the situation and get their side of the story. But then we have to preserve that. The Stuart archives, I know that there were criticism that this guy, was it Finn wrote a diary, and the diary disappeared. And then for some reason, he miraculously remembered what was in the diary that was lost, and then he wrote something down that was preserved. And then people came back to criticize him. So basically, then the short answer is, in my case, I have tape recordings of the interviews I've been conducting, and I still have a few that I still need to transcribe and translate. So I usually write both in Isiswati, which is the language they use in that area, and then after that I translate them into English. So that in an event that something got lost in the translation, you can always go back and check for yourself if you understand the original language. So I do have those. I was talking to Vugile, we'll work out the logistics. I mean, you and I work closely, so we'll talk off the screen. Okay, so those histories are preserved. Now, what is unique about Mzala? There are quite a number of things. Of course, Mzala was a liberation fighter like many others. Of course, there are a number of things he did which other liberation fighters did. He was not the only person to be both ANC and SSCP at the same time. So on that one, I agree with you. But then there are quite a number of things. One of them is that Mzala, being the critical politician or political figure that he was, he also did self-introspection, which is lacking today. That is one thing. And how did he do that? There would be times when he would have an opinion on a particular issue and write it down and put it there for others to comment. And those who attended the public lecture will remember that Nkosi also reflected on that. He would write a piece, and the minister also talks about this most of the time. He would write a piece, paste it on the wall, not the ones we see in our universities where students write inserts in the toilets and all of that. He would write something sensible, write it and paste it there, and then he would wait a bit. And then he would pause his pay today. And then if there is no response, he goes back tomorrow, and then he responds to the same piece that he wrote, and then he's now John. So John is criticizing Bay, and then he waits a bit. If there is a silence, then he comes back, then he's Dr. Nathi. So that is you don't find that every time. Even our former Dr. Jordan used to criticize the ANC from within, but then he didn't go to that extent. So in that case, I would say that is one of the things that is unique about it. There are quite a number of other things, but I just cited that one in the interest of time. Okay, the role of the media. The media has a critical role to play. It has always played a role. You look at South African politics, you look at African politics in general, international politics, the media has a role to play. And then if we were to do the apartheid way, we would infiltrate the media. That is what we would do. We would identify people we trust and then train them as journalists and let them get those positions fairly and squarely. And once they're inside, they will be sympathetic to the views we hold. That is what we'll do. But then, right now, we don't even have to do that. There are people who are on social networks. So you can write, instead of talking about the stuff that people talk about in social media, we'll be using the media in a constructive manner. Like this time, Mzala used to write these pieces and paste them on the wall. You could do the same, but then deposit it on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever else, so that you basically get people's views on it. So you can do that. Not just print media and television and all of that. The one that is easily accessible. So that would be my response to that one. Did I miss anything else? Yeah, I think I've covered all three.
Thank you so much. So what we've had this morning is a presentation by two scholars, where the one has taken the idea of memory and is exploring how people are using their memories and ways of remembering and ways of cherishing the legacy of Mzala through keeping those memories alive. Using them. So there's a lot of subjectivity in that, and the memory is always, when we talk about memory and when we, in research, when we are working with data, which is memory account or memory accounts, then we know that there's quite a lot of possibility of embroidering, embellishing, and there's a possibility of the subjectivity distorting it because of who the person who's remembering is, and what they're holding as dear and what they want to achieve. And that doesn't negate the value of that versus conventional cold data. And in your study, you've also tapped into memories, but they've been in the more conventional historical interview of informants from the local area. And in your both of the papers are dealing with history, and in yours it's the broad movement that we see in a national sort of stage, if we can put it, even though you were looking at Ngwavuma and looking at how the struggle shifted from the urban to the rural areas and looking at detail at one particular community's experience of that. Whereas in the other paper, we're getting, it's not this broad stage, it's actually focusing much more on the subjective memory of the one individual. And so they're very different takes, even though they are both bringing history alive to us. So I want to join me in giving a big thanks to our two presenters. One of the things that I'm wanting to say, and what that I've been asked to say as well before we close and go for lunch, is that along the periphery of this area that we're sitting in now is a little photographic exhibition, which is in fact from my own study. I'm the one who has contributed this and has put it up here. But this is from a postdoctoral study that I did of learners from the Durban area. The photographs are taken by learners in primary and high schools, and the words that are written there are their words, they're not my own. But it was a study that I conducted and about their experiences in going to school. What do they encounter on the way to school? What sort of lives are they living, and the conditions. And so that also reminds us that in fact our centre will be dealing much more broadly with social science issues and social justice and social, trying to address social inequalities also much more broadly in our focus, and not just on focused solely on Mzala. Yeah. I hope you can just enjoy and look at this when you're having lunch or at the end of the session today. If you came in and you didn't have the opportunity to sign a register, we would be really keen for you to sign the register, because we have said that this is a learning experience, so it's important for us in being accountable to our funders that we show them who attended the seminar. And so, Derek, where is the register now?
It's going to be on
that big table. Okay, so before you leave today, if you haven't signed the register, please do so. And the other thing that probably at the end of the day, we're going to have evaluation sheets. And one of the things that we're keen to know, today we've had 2 presentations that we focused on in the morning, more in depth. We had originally thought we would have 4 presentations. We'd like your feedback on, does it work better to have the 2 more in-depth presentations where you can engage, or have quick, fast 4 presentations? We'd like feedback on how you are receiving the kind of engagement that we've presented to you today, and whether it's been a worthwhile learning experience. So now I'd like to break the session and say we're going to have lunch. Where do we go for lunch? And then we're going to come back. So Derek, when would you like us to come back after lunch? It's now 1:45. Should we say still at 1:15? Or a little bit later?
Should we say?
Because it was meant to be 1:15. So 1:30. Right, so we're stealing a little bit from the afternoon. 1:30 we'll come back, so you have 45 minutes. Thank you very much. So enjoy your lunch.
You can serve yourself and then you can sit down here.
Please come and join me at the front. David and Singh, Paul Evans and Umleli Gili. Okay. Just leave the envelope for me. In any order, you can sit anywhere. With a data projector? No, just okay. And are you using the data projector?
No.
Super. All right. So good afternoon. I hope you had a lovely lunch. As well, my comrades up here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So let's see. We're scheduled to finish at 3 o'clock, and I would like to retain that time because there are people who are traveling from a long way, a long distance. Unfortunately, some have left us because they had other prior commitments, and so we're a little thinned out now. But I would like to just explain before I hand over to Siyabonga. Yes, I just put my glasses on when I read names. Siyabonga. How we had thought of this afternoon session is very different to how we had thought of this morning session. This was to be a panel of very provocative, short pieces that maybe aren't informed by a hell of a lot of research and scholarly reflection, but that are intellectually stimulating and also challenging, and that can help us start to debate some of the social issues, and that give a platform as well for those who are engaged in postgraduate study to talk about things that they are looking into, and about issues that they are very concerned about. So this is a different session this afternoon. Right. So So we have 4 presenters, and we're going to give them 10 minutes each, prepare 10 minutes each. And I think that what we'll do is we'll listen to all of their presentations, if you don't mind. Is that how you? We'll listen to all of them. So we're going to have approximately 40 minutes of listening, if you don't mind. And then we'll have an open discussion where we can talk about all of the issues and the debates and the dynamic in that. So we have Mzala Nxumalo, who's from UKZN, and he's going to be speaking to us about policy and implementation, but in particular about leadership. So just making a note to you that he's not speaking about traditional leaders, he's speaking about the leadership engaged in policy and implementation. And then we have David Nseng from CLP.
It's the Churchland program.
Churchland program, yes. I met one of your colleagues, I think, unless it was you and a different guise. When I was wearing a different hat as an academic at UKZN 2-3 years ago. So here we are going to be listening to David speak about the Churchland Project's praxis and the land question, another burning issue. And then Crawl Evans, and this is, Derek likes to play with identity. And so he's presenting in that persona today from the University of Cape Town, where he's registered as a master's student on the SACP and the Alliance, Leftist Babble in the Marketplace of Political Rhetoric. And then Mpumeleli Ngidi, who's a PhD student, at UKZN as well. Great. On forced removals from Cato Manor to Kwamashu, perspectives from the ground, a study based on oral history. Super. I'm dying to hear that because I've done research I encountered people who had been subject to that experience, that particular movement. So I'm going to hand over straight away to you, Siyabonga.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not sure if I do it from here.
You can stay right where you are.
Okay, perfect. It's probably better. As it has been said, I'm Mzala Nxumalo. I'm not a son or a grandson of Mzala at all. I am a student from UKZN studying policy and development studies. My research is focused on policy implementation and the challenges of policy implementation. That's how leadership gets into that subject. But I am also interested in monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs. So it's directly linked. I have prepared something that I would like to present today. It is part of a broader background on the study that I'm doing of policy implementation and the challenges that we have of policy implementation in South Africa. So thank you for the opportunity. Colleagues, I have written something down, so please bear with me if I refer to what I have written, because I tried to make the point and argument that I wanted to put across. Firstly, I would like to say that there is indeed a sense and a fact that most of our people are actually not happy with the development and government service that we are receiving from our government. The policy implementation trajectory that the government is taking seems to not be satisfactory to a lot of people. Recently, a study was published by Stats SA. This is just an example I'm making of a study done here in KwaZulu-Natal a citizens' satisfaction survey, which issued results that show that people are not happy with policy implementation in South Africa. I say policy implementation because, indeed, if we speak about policy formulation in South Africa, the policies that we have been largely influenced by collective debating, which is shaped by the background where we come from. I would like to make reference to the Freedom Charter as one of those bases which actually influenced our constitution and thus influenced the noble objectives that we have of an inclusive development and sharing of resources. So all of that is good in paper, but when it comes to implementation, that is where we have serious challenges. So that is the concern of my study that I am busy with. So the Freedom Charter itself was also one of Mzala's interests. I took time to look at his views about it, and I picked up that, or understood that Mzala, even though he discarded it as not a communist document, but he did not disregard what the Freedom Charter says. In fact, he embraced it and actually saw it as a very important collection of views of a collective about what we would like our country to be in the next few years when he was writing it. So it indeed informs noble and good policies that we hope to achieve as a country. But the challenge is indeed on implementation, as I said. So Mzala, on the Freedom Charter, he made it clear that the Freedom Charter was not a communist document. I made a mention of that. I would like to quote him when he says, "The sum total of our national democratic aspirations and the new democratic life that we need is in the Freedom Charter. On the basis of the Freedom Charter are founded the cornerstones of our principles of freedom and democracy, which informs most of our policies, as we may know some of them." So now, these policy objectives have serious challenges, because the study that I referred to earlier shows quite a few things. It shows that the dissatisfaction with policy implementation, government policy implementation, is still largely on racial grounds. Most of the people that are still unhappy about the current government and its services are still those who are or who were previously oppressed. So in a way, this brings the national question back into the picture again, to say, are we ever going to see an inclusive development where people's potential, where people are able to exercise their potentials freely? I'm talking about those who were previously oppressed and who today still suffer unemployment, poverty, and inequality. So that seems to be the main challenge. How do we eradicate these three problems, and considering the fact that it is a continuing problem based on racial grounds? So I don't know how I'm doing for time.
You've got 3 minutes left.
Thank you very much.
2 to 3.
That's fine. So that's the problem, because most of us have heard that, South Africa has some of the best policies in the world. Some even say it has the best constitution in the world. So if it does have that, how come there is no implementation of such on the ground? So I would like to draw on theory a little bit about why some of these challenges exist. Policy analysts and practitioners have argued with this matter quite a lot, and saw that some of the failures in policy implementation have to do with how policy implementation is done. There is what they call the top-down approach, where they would see policy, someone would say everything is good until it leaves God's hands. Once it's on the implementers of that policy, then policy is doomed for failure because of many problems that the implementers of policy might actually have to implement that policy. And these people of the top-down approach would advocate for that and say, if people do as they are told, would have effective policy implementation. On the other hand, you have the bottom-up, people advocating for the bottom-up approach would say, no, but policy, if you look at it, it is actually formulated while it's being implemented. As you are implementing a policy or a program, that's when you realize its weaknesses. So it's important that the implementers and their opinions, their views, their experiences are considered. So those are the presentations from the theory about why some of the policies fail. I would like to sum up by saying that I really think that we ought to consider the challenges of policies that we have, of policy implementation that we have, and see if there is. I heard a gentleman saying earlier that no, we need some new order of implementing policies to ensure that there is effective policy implementation. And with that, I would like to end, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, let's move straight along to David to talk to us about the land question.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be part of this event and to learn more about Comrade Mzala Nxumalo. The Churchland Program is an NGO based here in Pietermaritzburg. It was established in 1997 by a collaboration of another NGO called Association for Rural Advancement, AFRA, and another one which was called Pietermaritzburg, PAXA, it's called PAXA, Pietermaritzburg Agency for Social Christian Awareness. These two thought it is important that a project that looks at land question in our country is established as a response to a gap that existed at the time where everyone was talking about land, but no one was talking about land that is owned by missionary churches. Missionary churches, Lutherans, Catholics, Methodists, NG Kerk, and all those who would have acquired land during the times of colonialization or as a result of all the colonial project that was active in the 1800s and early 1900s. So our organization was formed to look directly at that, and a couple of things emerged. One of which was, indeed, it is of great concern how churches acquired land in Africa and in South Africa in particular. As part of the colonial project, churches also had a role in stripping off African people of their identity their means of making a life, and their history, obviously their future. Now, if you look at the post-94 era, where there is so much activism around, whether at policy level or formulation and implementation, to restore people's rights to land, which is in the hands of commercial farmers and so forth, you have to also do the same for the land that is in the hands of missionary churches, because people who reside on those land parcels suffered the same fate, and they have a bleak future just like everyone else who is landless. That is a short background of where Church Land Program comes from. Over the years, obviously, as the context of post-94 changed, the organization adapted to new changes. In the beginning, our focus was mainly rural. But as the question of land rights in the urban areas, housing rights in the urban areas, services, basic services, or what you would want to say, interim services, water, electricity, roads, and all of that became important. The organization saw it fit to also spend energy and resources understanding exactly what is the plight of those who are in the urban centers, still feeling after 94 that their dignity, their right to a decent life is not realized. So from 2005 to date, alongside working in the rural context, the organization spends a lot of time paying attention to experiences of urban communities. I particularly am responsible for that area of work, which not only includes listening to these experiences, but supporting these communities. What is interesting in that process is that there is quite a lot of, in today's social language, social network language, in Facebook and Twitters and what, people talk about throwbacks. There is a lot of throwbacks when listening to the narrative of people in these urban communities experiencing injustices, throwbacks in the sense that they seem to narrate similar stories that were narrated. Perhaps it will come from Babungiti, a story of people in the 50s, 60s, the Katomena experience. They still say similar things today, which brings us to a very serious question. What has gone wrong in the post-94 political project of restoring dignity, of restoring rights, of restoring hope for a better future? Our analysis as the organization is that what went wrong is the ability for those in authority, whether from the level of councillors, ward councillors, to the level of national leadership or national governance, to listen attentively and listen with intent. How do people draw lessons from what they have learned, the experience of injustices, and then make formulations of how to get out of this misery? There is no listening with intent to communities who are suffering this injustice, so that by the time there is formulation of policy or implementation of policy, there is already a great mishap, because those who should be beneficiaries of what is to be delivered have no input on what is to be delivered and how it should. As a result, of course, there are things we can name that are part of post-94 achievements. So many houses have been built, and so many houses have been electrified. So many areas have water standpipes. Obviously, we remember the time of Kada Asmal, he would say at least 200 meters from where people are to the standpipe in his campaign for 1 million standpipes, you know. The dilemma is, as part of this mishap of not listening to those who are suffering, the delivery is not what the doctor ordered. It's 30 square meter brick house, sometimes in areas that are not conducive for such development. As a result, 2-3 months later, houses are cracking. Or it will be in a landscape that will not allow enough reticulation of water, or, you know, there are many things that are a testimony to. Here is a provision of a service that has been thought in a boardroom by consultants, very dedicated and professional consultant, but missing one basic element: listening to what people say they really want. And maybe I should connect what I'm saying to our memory of Comrade Mzala Nxumalo. That comrades who spoke in the morning, bringing back the memories and bringing our attention to the use of memory and the importance of memory, is that there is a lot of reference to him listening. One, of course, to the leadership, but also the whole activism was making sure that their operations are directly linked to where people's aspirations are. And that is missing now. Now, we as the organization are of the opinion that land is the issue. The struggle that was waged, we were told this morning, from 1912 to date by the ANC in its initial form, it was about land. Because 1913 Land Act was part of the continuation of the colonial project of stripping African people of their rights to land, access to land, their dignity and future. 1936 was a continuation. The experience of the Katomenas and elsewhere in the country, District 6 is still stuck in that horrible history. Well, all those things are testimony to the fact that land is the issue. So any restoration of dignity, any post-1994 project should start there, because that is the fundamental of what it means to be in a position to live a better life, or at least have a hope for a better life. So the organization bases its resources, energy, time to listening to groups of villagers, urban communities, to listening to them as they make sense of their experience and as they formulate how to get to where or to the future they want. I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Okay, can I hand over straight to Drew?
There's a disclaimer that I speak on my own terms here, not the centre. So, the piece that I wrote in the beginning is a very flippant and at times irreverent piece, and doesn't really grapple with the complexities of why I think the South African Communist Party should not be part of the alliance. In other words, that it should re-articulate its stand in relation to alliance politics and how that plays out in, and your point is made, both of you, and I'm sure the fourth one, about the lived experiences of people. It's about, I think that whilst many Marxist theorists decry the postmodern turn, the one thing that the postmodern turn has done for us is to make us realize that the lived experiences of people and the theoretical writings that came as a response by Marxists of that turned towards the very real material conditions of where people found themselves. So I'm going to read the paper as I wrote it, and it was meant to be provocative, it was meant to be flippant, and it was meant to be pretty much what I'm like, so forgive me. It has been my concern for some time that the choir of leftists, and here you can read Marxists, anarchists, socialists, and activists, have lost the score sheet and opted to rather sing along with the dominant tenor of heteronormative politics, its voice lost in the repetitive drone of the normalizing discourse of previously leftist, now centrist ANC. As my title suggests, Battle in the Marketplace plays on both the discursive normalizing of the current political rhetoric and, of course, the machinations of the marketplace of neoliberalism manifested in vulgar consumerism. Mine is not an analysis of the interplay between normative political transformations, strategies of market economies, other than to say in agreement with Gayatri Spivak that multinationals and global markets manage country states and their markets by appealing to the phantasm referred to as the rule of law, an ideological ruse that encourages the nationalist agenda of neoliberal conservatives who perform as progressives but are tenderpreneurs, not the least interested in the emancipation of what was the working class from a capitalist yoke. To note also that Marx spilled out his Das Kapital in Eurocentric terms, presuming everyone engaged in work of one type or another, in other words, industrial work. And in current terms, Marxism can no longer only be for the industrial worker. A broad sweep of my own particular view of Parliament, which has seen ministers of the state and quasi-intellectuals within the EFF sprouting Fanon and Sankara, invoking Biko along with the now sanctified host of slain and living voices of the Black Conscious movement and the struggle, all in the service of an emergent and vibrant new economy that benefits only the tenderpreneurs, the multinationals, or those who run the parastatal entities. It is within this context that I critique the SACP and others on the left about whether the alliance in its current form is still a position to maintain. In the 21 years of democratic rule of the ANC and by extension the alliance, we have seen remarkable shifts in the marketplace of politics and economy. Mbeki, who took us down the road of neoliberal economy, replaced by Zuma, whom it was hoped would take us back to the path from which we had strayed. But what we have witnessed is smoke and mirrors, politicking and patronage. It requires no real intellectual effort to understand how the various economic policies have shaped the agenda of capital, which is mostly still largely white and multinational, and have failed to address the socio-economic conditions of the majority of South Africans. I lay the blame both at the feet of the state, represented by the ANC, and the alliance, and as well as us, the people. As history has shown us, the tricameral parliament in no way furthered the cause of the black majority in much the same way as the alliance perhaps has not forwarded the cause of the unemployed and poor, the working poor, or a truly leftist agenda. In fact, both states have left us impoverished in both the political and in terms of monetary capital. Large-scale abdication by the state of its responsibility for the eradication of persistent right-wing neoliberal policies and the economic emancipation through an elaborate BEEE framework benefits only a few and creates another class of black capital to rival that of white capital. While the new elite prospers, we witness its extreme manifestations best represented by the sushi on tits brigade. The worker citizen, the impoverished, the unemployed, the rural child, the woman, the othered queer citizens on the margins, only receiving benefits in a piecemeal fashion. This view does not ignore what has been done thus far, but is it enough, and has it been able to keep up with the swelling ranks of unemployed, the poor and the working poor? The answer is to create a dole system like England or France, or is it to restore dignity to the poor and the working through being masters of their labor and the profits thereof. In the upcoming elections, we see the political machinery of all parties either touting, look at what we have done, at what we are doing and what we will do, evidenced by paperless schools in Gauteng, whilst paperless toilets at schools abound, or where flush toilets are absent, where pit latrines are the norm, one must ask some tough and pertinent questions. Perhaps this is why civil society activists throw shit around. The vote of no confidence in the president by one gaggle of politicians, which the country's people has perhaps already decided and which Parliament will never be able to do, along with the Land and Nkandla Brigade, whose commander, on return from the UK, will want us, in his own words, that is South Africa, to be like that. England, that is. This party rakes up lost supporters in the kingdom. This troupe of carnival performers do not offer any viable alternatives or anything substantive in terms of policy. But what of the upcoming elections? Will this be the litmus test for the ANC and the alliance, or will it be the litmus test for the ANC as ruling party and or as a political party? And what is the distinction between ruling and political party? Let me be provocative. He who sups with the devil should have a long spoon. Can the left currently, represented by alliance of ANC, COSATU and the SACP, afford to dine at the table of a politically centrist ANC? The left in tatters is supplanted by the quasi-Marxist and Africanist rhetoric of the EFF and the white as black but now in fact blue DA, traversing the avenues of the sensible and reasonable, which in essence is really just right-wing ideology prefaced by we will, and bolstered by its predominantly white, privileged middle-class supporters and now parts of that emerging, elusive black middle class. Is the left prepared to let the EFF or the ANC speak for it, or will it find its voice after a long-suffering laryngitis attack? Who knows? If it does what we can imagine the left to be saying. NUMSA, to its credit, despite my own reservations, however, has dared to break the status quo. Where that shift will go remains yet to be seen, but nostalgia has beckoned back to the time of the UDF and MDM formations as a possibility. As the roads must fall and fees must fall, eruptions have shown the youth are dissatisfied, disgruntled, use whatever adjective you wish, but they are politically emerging with their own voice. Uprising of a different nature, not as revolutionary as 76, but certainly they are sure of their objectives and determined to get what they want. Trotskyist anger being their driving force. Fees must fall being particularly significant as it pitted the SACP's General Secretary and the Minister of Higher Education Training against student-led opposition to the state person, those who hold the strings. Linked to this is the emergence of long-held tribal ethnic libraries already alluded to in an article by Archie Nafedji in the 70s, and a theme subsequently taken up by discordant and fractured advocates and leftists, and Mzala being one of them. I'm probably going to just move to my last paragraph, otherwise we won't make it. Raising the questions is probably more important at this stage of the left's attempt to rekindle Marxist critique of South African society, which Comrade Bladen Nzimande envisions will be the staple work of the Mzala Center. We have to now try and find the answers, if that is possible. Long live the Mzala.
Thank you. Cool. Evans. Right, now I hand over to Mpumeleli Ngidi.
As introduced, I'm Mr. Mpumeleli Ngidi, and because there's a recorder here, we are being recorded. I'm sitting here wearing two caps. One as a UKZN staff member, and number two as a PhD student. In this research, I present it as a student, to be safe.
like crawling.
Okay, my title is, as you can see it, is Force Removers from Ketomena to Guamashu, Perspective from the Ground, a study based on oral history. The historical background of Ketomena, legend provides us that